Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the H3D Foundation webinar series. Our today's speaker is Dr. Gabrielle Nudelman. Dr. Nudelman works at the School of Management and Governance, University of New South Wales, Australia. Dr. Nudelman believes that academia can be isolating and intimidating, but this does not have to be the case. So, she is busy breaking down the ivory tower walls by teaching students to speak and write their way to success. She teaches students to write reports, give presentations, create visual aids, navigate correspondence, and build e-portfolios. Additionally, she coaches graduate students on their thesis writing journeys, whether they are contemplating setting out, already embarked, or in the midst of the jungle, or nearing their destination. She acts as a compass to keep them on course. Today's topic is common academic writing errors and how to fix them. And now I would like to request Dr. Nudelman to share her work with us. Over to you, Dr. Nudelman.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Shruti, for the introduction. And hello, everybody. I hope that you are keeping well. In a minute, I'm going to tell you where I am because it might be a little bit surprising, but I would love it if you could just pop in the chat as we're starting and getting our conversation going. I'd love to hear where in the world you are. So if you could pop that in the chat, that would be lovely so we can get that coming. So that we can get that going and I can hear where my audience is today. So thank you so much again for the invitation to speak to you today, and thank you for that lovely, generous introduction. I taught communication skills at the University of Cape Town for 13 years. I taught all kinds of skills, as Shruti said, from professional communications, but I have a special focus on academic communication skills. I have many years of background working in writing centers, helping students on a one-on-one basis, and just loving and being so passionate about this experience caused me to start my side business called My Thesis Coach. Through My Thesis Coach, I worked with thesis students Shruti, South Africa. I worked with thesis students who across all different fields, all different disciplines. So I was dealing with health professionals, with lawyers, with tax students, with art students. So it's a very wide breadth of different disciplines. But I do believe that there are some core features of really good academic writing. So let's start off by talking about where I was. For so many years, I was based in Cape Town, and this beautiful view, I must say, made me feel a little homesick. But 5 months ago, I left that view for this view. So I'm in Sydney now, and I'm based at the University of New South Wales. A very big cultural change, a lot to leave South Africa and leave my home and leave everything that I know well. I will admit to you that I miss my students very much, but also I'm having a lot of fun on this brand new adventure. So many of you, I hope, would have got the link to the survey that we sent out a couple of weeks ago. I run these workshops fairly often, and it's quite difficult to know whether you're targeting your content directly to the challenges that people are having with their work. So as you can see here, I asked kind of what would people actually like us to focus on, and that was our response. You can see we had 57 responses, and there was a 31.6% who wanted common academic writing errors and how to fix them. So you asked, and I answered. And what we're going to do in our time today is run through 5 of the sort of most common academic writing errors that I see coming up in people's work. I'm going to share those 5 with you. And then I'm also going to share with you some tips on actually how to improve these and how to fix these errors. But I want to, before I jump into even what these 5 errors are, I want to reassure you, I don't know anybody from first-year student to experienced professor who finds academic writing easy. I certainly don't. I have a PhD. I've published in journals. Actually, I love the process of writing, but I definitely don't find it easy. It's challenging. It's difficult to get your ideas together. There's, I don't know about you, but there are huge feelings of imposter syndrome that go along, feeling like, am I good enough? Do I have the authority to say this? Will I say it correctly? What will people think when they read my work? And I hope wherever you are right now, some of these things that I'm saying are resonating with you. So I'm going to start off by saying something which I'm also going to say right at the end, and that is that everybody's first draft of anything sucks. Nobody gets it right the first time, and nobody is supposed to. The first draft of writing, I actually think the hardest work is getting words on the page, right? That's the hardest, is sitting down in a chair with your computer and space and time and like facing yourself and your demons and getting those words down on a page. I really think that is actually the hardest part. Once you're there, though, the challenge is to just keep those words flowing. So I'm going to share these 5 common academic writing errors with you now, but I want you to know that if you're making these errors, that is totally fine, and that is to be expected. What we do, we write that draft, and then you go back and you revise it, and you make it a little bit better, and you get feedback from a colleague perhaps, and you make it a little bit better, and you craft it, and you cut it down, and you shape it, and you fix the mistakes. That's what ends up being a good piece of academic writing. So just I always say to my clients, my thesis writing clients and students that I work with, if you are getting words down on the page, you are 100% winning, because how many people aren't managing to do that? So you are winning. And then the work of going back to fix them, to shape them, that's beautiful. But I think I just want to instill some confidence in you, knowing that words on the page, as long as you're doing that, you're already winning. And anything on top of that is just beautiful, fixing it, making it look pretty, putting on a beautiful filter and putting on some makeup on the writing and trimming it down and, giving some Photoshop action, that's what all this editing stuff is. But that comes afterwards. That said, let me share these 5. I went through the kinds of challenges that I see many people that I work with, the challenges that I come up, and I try to think what would be the kind of 5 that would resonate most strongly with you today. And this is what I came up with. So number 1 that we're going to look at is overly complex writing. Number 2 is weak academic arguments. This is obviously something that is very particular to academic writing, where we are needing to tie together sources, empirical data, and make arguments. So that's one of the things we're going to look at. We are going to look at misuse of academic sources. And I'm actually not talking about plagiarism now, although perhaps we'll touch on that as we go through, but that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is the ways in which you use your sources in your writing. Number 4 is very long and very short paragraphs, which is something I see a lot. And as someone who reads a lot of writing, that really frustrates my ability to engage with the text that I read. And number 5 is ignoring the audience. And I actually think that this is a nice one to end off with, because I think it'll resonate with you, perhaps particularly in the field of what you're doing, which that work being so cutting edge and kind of so valuable to people, and you needing to be able to translate those results to a wider audience. So those are the 5 that we're going to talk about. I'm wondering how long it's going to take. Perhaps, we'll talk for about another half an hour or so. After that, though, the floor opens to questions, and you're more than welcome to jump in, ask any questions. Save those questions, though, because I love interacting. So when we open at the end, I would love to be able to help you personally, if I can, on the things that are your particular challenges. Okay, so let us talk about overly complex writing. And I thought that I would share with you a little extract of truly over complex writing. This was a piece, so they used to run, they don't do it anymore, but a couple of years ago, there was an annual competition for the most complex and poorly written academic writing. And you'll see why this piece by Judith Butler was the winner in 1998. Okay, so are you ready? Take a deep breath. We are diving in. Are you ready? The move from a structuralist account in which capital is understood to structure social relations in relatively homologous ways to a view of hegemony in which power relations are subject to repetition, convergence, and rearticulation brought the question of temporality into the thinking of structure and marked a shift from a form of Althusserian theory that takes structural totalities, sorry, I'm moving to read my second screen, as theoretical objects to one in which the insights into the contingent possibility of structure inaugurate a renewed conception of hegemony as bound up with in the contingent sites and strategies of the rearticulation of power. So I doubt in your field you are very likely to be writing about this, although who knows, perhaps you have a little side hustle as a social scientist. But I just thought this is a really super example of how not to write readable academic texts. So first of all, can you see it is all one sentence? That is a long sentence. Secondly, can you see all of this kind of jargon thrown in there? So a structuralist account, a homologous, can't even say it, homologous way, hegemony, inaugurate a concept. These are just big, lofty terms that are so difficult to engage in. It's not to say we can't use these words if we need to, but just this massive wall and chunk of text coming at us is so, I don't know, I read this, I'm sure many of you read this and you're like, okay, I'm not going to listen to Gabby. Or as I was reading, you're thinking, oh, this is boring, and you just tuned out. Now, that is exactly the response you don't want your reader to be having when they are reading your academic writing. I really, truly believe that while there are very strict and clear, I'm going to say rules in inverted commas for academic writing as a genre, that doesn't mean it has to be boring, right? If you're writing about something interesting, and you all are, you're writing about these awesome discoveries, and I guess any academic writing, you're putting forward interesting findings based on data, why shouldn't it be kind of pull us in? Why shouldn't it be interesting and grab us? So here are some tips. Hopefully I have convinced you that sort of this very overly complex way of writing is not the way to go. So let's look at a couple of things that you can do in order to simplify. I said this was academic writing errors and how to fix them. So let's look at some of the things that you can do in order to fix that. So the first thing would be to use simple, clear language and avoiding unnecessary jargon. Now, I feel like it would have spoiled my pretty slides, but I feel like I should have had a little asterisk there to say that very much depends on who your audience is. And I know when you're writing to an audience of professionals in your field, they will understand what your scary term, drug creation, medical, scientific terms are. So they'll get it. You can obviously use it then. But be mindful of who your audience is. It might happen that you're writing up the findings about your research for a wider audience, right? And we'll talk at the end how that might be the case. If that is so, be mindful that your reader might not know what all of that means. You always want to try and use a smaller word if you can. I don't know, there's this perception amongst people that I work with where like, I'm going to put in the big words and then people will think I'm super smart because I'm using the big words. But I find that there are two problems with big words. The first is that it's easy to make a mistake when you use a really big word because it's very unfamiliar. And the second thing is that the reader might not understand it. So they might get it wrong. And then, what was the point of putting the point across in the first place? So simple, clear language, avoiding unnecessary jargon. Short, to the point sentences. You saw this last example. That was all one sentence. I nearly died. That is not the response you want your reader to have. So often when I'm working with academics and students' text, I comment on those sentences. If it's going on and on and on, just stick a full stop in and start a new sentence. The reader, think about, I think actually the only thing I should have said to you today is always just think about your reader, right? What is their experience reading your text? And do things like shorten your sentences, have nice sized paragraphs, which we'll talk about later, use clear words in order to help your reader. If you can put those mechanisms into your academic writing, they are going to engage with your text better. And that's what every academic needs, right? That's what we want. We want people to be reading and valuing what we do. So short, to the point sentences is one way to do that. I always get stuck explaining this because I try to tell it to people and then they're like, Gabby, I last heard about active and passive speech when I was in high school. But bear with me. You want to try and use active speech, active voice wherever possible. So let me remind you what the difference is between those. Passive voice is reagent was added to the sample by the scientist. That's passive voice. Active voice is the scientist added reagent to the sample. Can you see how that second example is just a lot more energetic, right? It's shorter, that's the first thing. It's just less wordy. It gets to the point more quickly. It adds, I use that word energy, it adds that energy to the text and moves them through while they're reading it. Now, I know in academia, that's not always possible. Sometimes, it will feel like when you're using the active, it feels too informal. Also, with most academic writing, we don't use the pronoun I or we or my experiment. And in that situation, sometimes we use passive. So I have to laugh when I'm editing my documents that I've written. Sometimes Grammarly will say, you're using the passive speech. And I say, I know, I'm an academic. But I really do try and limit it because I know that that can make the writing more cumbersome and more complex. And finally, the last thing that I want to say here is you want to avoid unnecessary words and phrases. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean now. And if you're anything like me, you're going to laugh because I find myself doing this all the time. I will use the big fancy 5 words that says due to the fact that, when I could literally just say because. I will say in order to discover when I could just say to. In the event sorry, that's supposed to be in the event of, obviously. I could just say if. For the purposes of, I could just say for. And there are so many other ones of these, and you can Google them if you want. Just look at sort of words for clear academic text or something like that. There are lists and lists of these, and I always have to smile in my writing because my default is to use these big phrases and also to say everything 3 times. So I'm a social scientist, but I'll say something like, the teaching initiative was valuable, successful, and effective. I don't know where I got the style of the rule of 3, but actually those 3 things mean the same thing, and I could literally just say one. I always say the reader is never going to be frustrated with you because you were too clear, right? They're not going to be annoyed because they could understand you too well. That is a good thing. And just the last thing that I'll say on this point is just think about the academic texts that you like reading, right? In my field, there are some authors who I will read a paper. Please, I wish you could tell me if you've had this experience. If you can give me a reaction or something, that would be lovely. Otherwise, just nod with me wherever you are in the world. But sometimes I will sit down and I will read a paper, and I'm a good academic now. I don't know how to do this. I will read from the beginning and I will read to the end, and then I will look up and I will think, I actually have no idea what just happened in my life. What did I just read? Often that is because it is so weighty. It doesn't mean that the writer didn't have good ideas. It's just that they were so kind of intertwined in this like dense foliage of words that I couldn't get to them. So the writers that I love are the ones who have those brilliant ideas, but can also articulate them clearly and concisely. Thank you. I got a reaction. I'm going to assume that you have had that feeling as well, and I feel better about my life. I'm being very vulnerable here, right? But we're all academic writers, so I'm assuming we share the same challenges. So there are amazing writers. They are the ones who can take these complex, brilliant, mind-expanding ideas, right? Because as academics, that's what we trade in, mind-expanding ideas, and just articulate them in such a beautiful, clear, and concise way. But I'll say it again, and I will say it many times throughout today's session. That doesn't have to happen the first time you make a point, right? That can be something that happens as you edit. Write those words down, go back and edit them. But that's what we should be striving for in terms of simple, clear language. Okay, next up, let's talk about weak academic arguments. I struggled with what to call this. So you can see I put my second heading, literature laundry lists, which has alliteration, which always makes me happy. You can see that I put that there as well, because this is something that I see a lot when I'm working with academics on their writing. And I'm wondering whether this is going to, whether you're going to recognize this in the stuff that you've read or the stuff that you perhaps sometimes write. Okay, so I put this on the slide and then forgot that I'm going to have to read it and actually pronounce all these big fancy medical words. So just bear with me. Okay, so have a look at this example. Slow regression of disease while receiving therapy was associated with an increase in CD8 plus T cells in bronchoalveolar lavage fluid. Killing of intracellular bacterial was dependent on the cytolytic mediators perforin and granulysin. CD8 plus T cells have an alternative role in detecting infected cells where the pathogen is in the cytoplasm. CD1 molecules transport lipid antigens via the endoplasm for presentation at the cell surface to CD8 plus T cells. Phew, I have a bit of a headache now. Okay, but if you have a look at that piece of text, it is doing, I suppose, what we traditionally think that a certain part of our academic writing is meant to do, right? So you can see we're drawing on 3 academic sources here. So this one from 1995, 98, 1997. But my question to you would be, is this actually putting forward an academic argument? I hope that you have just shaken your head again, wherever you are in the world. Because can you see what they're doing is they're just sticking the information. And I'm saying just, and I will never say that this is easy. So what this author has done is they're just putting that information from the sources. It is related and it does kind of make sense next to each other. They're just putting them there. But what they're not doing is that clever work of weaving it together. And I always think I'm going like this because I'm imagining I'm holding a needle and thread, right? Our job as the writer is to weave the sources together in such a way that it puts an argument across. Now, arguments in academic writing can be a difficult thing to explain because sometimes we think of arguments and we think, oh, it means something is good, or oh, it means something is bad. And that's absolutely not the case. Argument in academic writing means that we are stating something and then backing that up with academic sources or data. And you can see here, actually, they're not doing that, right? They're just telling us what these three sources say, but they are not telling us why this is of interest or why this is of value. And you can imagine if you just sort of saw this in the middle of a piece of writing, you'd think, okay, like, but what am I supposed to do with this? So really, what you want to be doing is weaving that together with the thread. And there are various strategies that you can do for that. The one is to have a really nice, strong opening sentence to those paragraphs. So here it says, the manner by which mycobacterial proteins gain access to MHC class 1 for presentation to the CD8 plus T cells is still poorly understood. So there we go. That is the argument. That is what this paragraph is going to be saying and what these sources are going to be supporting. And remember, I'll just say again before we carry on with that, the same principle exists when you are writing up your data. So you could be making an academic argument with literature, as is done here, or you could be making the academic argument with the empirical data that you have. But so can you see we've got this nice opening sentence? Then these things that are highlighted in blue, these things that are highlighted in blue, can you see how they are moving the reader through and making sense of how these different bits from the literature all relate to each other? And also, while they're doing it, they are putting forward an argument. Like we can tell here what the writer is trying to tell us. So it has been found that, and it gives us a little bit of voice. We can hear the writer in there. In addition, that I have such a thing for these transition words, like in addition, moreover, including, however, in contrast. I really love those words. So here's a nice in addition. And what that does is it tells us that this next point is going to be building on the previous point. So you're doing that work for the reader, right? You're giving us meaning. You're helping guiding us through it. And have an alternate yet critical role. There we go. You're making a statement here. You're making an argument, telling us that these have a critical role. So I want you to be thinking about two things here. The one is argument, which is what is the statement you are backing up here with your literature? And the second is voice. And voice is the fact that you have done the work. You are guiding the reader through the text. And you can see it's not written in such a way that the writer's gone, I believe that this. And from my experiment, I have found that it's not that first person. And yet there is a very clear argument coming out here. Here was another example, and I cannot read the whole thing because it is very scary with your fancy medical words. But there we go. Nice, clear opening sentence. The use of IGRAs to diagnose LTBI is not commonly used in the developing world. So what we've got there is a very clear statement. Sorry, I have lost you. Give me a sec. There we go. So what we've got there is a very clear opening sentence that is telling us what is the academic argument that this paragraph is going to be making. And then in blue, you can see a whole bunch of these little transition words. We've got a yet, we've got an in addition, we've got a consequently there. So these little words are helping on doing that work of the thread, weaving together the different points that you got. And that is how the argument comes out. And that is how we start to hear voice. And I'll talk a little bit more about voice at the moment. So I hope that is making sense. But I'm going to give you a metaphor. I trade a lot in metaphors with my teaching and coaching. So bear with me. But I always like to imagine that the writer, go with me on this one. I always like to imagine that the writer is a tiny little tour guide in the text. And the writer is guiding the reader through. So they're saying, this paragraph deals with blah, 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 blah. Here's this point. However, here's another point. Da, 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 da. In addition, that supports that. Contrastingly, you can see what they're doing. Is that metaphor working? Let me know. You can pop me another reaction if you'd like. But you can see that those little words are like moving the reader, like giving them a little tour through your paragraphs and making sense of how, thank you, very kind, very kind. And making sense of how the different things that you are sharing is related to each other. And then again, how that all feeds into that overall argument. Thank you for the thumbs up. Means a lot. So yeah, I'm a big one on paragraphs, and you will see why more in a moment when we get to our fourth point, I think. But yes, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so I have said here the misuse of academic sources, and this goes with many different things. I said I'm not really going to talk about plagiarism, and we can if you want at the end if you have any questions around that. I really believe that most people don't mean to plagiarize. Yes, of course, you get a couple of bad seeds who copy directly from someone's work or from an existing piece of work. I would really like to believe that most of us don't do that, right? That's an academic integrity. We're all out to do the very best that we can. Perhaps there's some bad apples, but I really think the issues around plagiarism generally happen when people don't know how to do it properly. And that is not what we're talking about today. But that said, I often see mistakes in the ways that people are using academic sources. So one of those ways is the overuse of direct quotes. This is something that I often see with novice researchers. So you might recognize yourself in here, or think about someone, perhaps you've supervised someone or um, worked with someone else, or perhaps you do this as well. There's that sense, and I can totally understand why it happens. You think, okay, academic writing needs to be based on, we need to put in literature. That researcher has been in this field for 25 years. I'm never going to be able to say things better than that person. So I think I'm just going to use their words and I'm going to direct quote it. It's not an academic integrity issue if you're referencing properly, which I assume you all are. Sorry, everybody. Talking about academic writing gets me so excited. Overheating here. So it's not an academic integrity issue, but what happens if you have too many direct quotes next to each other is that we entirely lose that sense of you in the text, right? We just see quote from this person, quote from that person, quote from this person, quote from that person. And I'm like, okay, thanks for the quotes, but actually, what is the point of these? How are they related to each other? What is the point that we're making? We lose that sense of you in the text and we lose that voice. And actually what you do in that situation is that you end up making your reader do most of the work, because a reader has to think really hard and think, okay, how are these things related? Why are they sharing this? And newsflash, readers don't want to do more work than they have to do. That's why you want to make your text really simple and easy for them. So I always say to people I'm working with, if there is a quote and it is just like magnificent, just the words are like, mwah, couldn't be said better, you would never be able to put it in your own words, then absolutely you can. Another place where you can use direct quotes is perhaps if you're pulling something out of policy, or it's really important that you're, I don't know, say you need to quote a policy from the Medical Research Council or something, and you use their direct words and you need it to be those direct words, then of course you can direct quote. But as much as possible, you want to try and put people's ideas in your own words. But it's more than that. It's not just putting their ideas in your own words, but it's also putting their ideas in the point that you are trying to make. Does that make sense? You might have said, I might have read something beautiful that you wrote. It's not just those words are great, which they might be, but it's more likely that that strongly supports a point that I'm making or adds to the argument that I'm writing. It's actually that's more interesting than the particular words. So my job as a writer, is to show the reader not only what that person said, but also how that fits into my argument. And those transition words, which we looked at in the past example, those can already help in building that argument. But too many direct quotes can definitely be off-putting for a reader. I have said here lack of variety. That will obviously depend on the kind of text that you are writing. Of course, if you are doing a survey of studies from 1992 to 1994, you will only draw on studies from 1992 and 1994. I get that. But what you are doing, if you're writing up a literature review, what you are doing is showing the reader that you have surveyed the literature or reviewed the literature, right? So you need a little bit of a breadth in there to show that you have looked at different things and that you're pulling them together to show, if I'm writing a literature review about, I'll talk about my field, higher education in Australia, for example, I want to show that I've not just read like 3 sources in the space of 2 years, right? I want to show that I've surveyed the breadth of it. I've looked at massive literature review. Perhaps I've looked at since university started in this country till current. Perhaps I want to look at all the different provinces, what they call them here, all the different states in Australia and survey those. I want to show that I've looked at stuff from teaching journals and also history journals. I want to show that breadth. And this will obviously depend, I'll just say again, on the nature of the thing that you are writing about. But something that I remember, I think the first paper that I put in for peer review, one of the things when it bounced back, because it always bounces back, right? One of the pieces of feedback was that I needed to update my literature and show wider breadth of research. So I've always remembered that, and hopefully that's helpful for you as well. Okay, this inadequate synthesis is a really important point. A literature review is meant to do two things. It's meant to summarize what you've read, but it's also really importantly meant to synthesize those points. So your job in a literature review is not only to tell me what other people have written, but your job in a literature review is to tie together those points in such a way that it creates a coherent narrative or a coherent argument. So one of the things that I see a lot in academic writing is inadequate synthesis. So it'll look like Nudelman explained that blah, 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 blah. Thing says that Dambuzo explains blah, 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 blah. I hope you like these little sounds I'm making. So it gives me almost that sort of this person said that, this person said that, this person said that. I'm like, thanks, but like, what am I meant to do with that? That second part that's not happening is a synthesis. So it's not easy, but that synthesis is a vital part of a good piece of academic writing. I'm sure in a field where research is so fast moving, like yours is, this point goes without saying, but you want to be careful of using outdated sources. That was what happened to that paper that bounced back to me, and something that I often see as well. Unreliable sources. Man, journals can be tricky these days, right? It is predatory journals out there that aren't that aren't peer reviewed, so we can't know that they are credible sources. There's ChatGPT and all of that telling us about our life, and I do think that that can be useful, which I'll touch on at the end. But you want to make sure that you're drawing on really credible, reliable sources here. And there are various ways of doing that. Check that the journal that you're drawing information from is on the accredited list. If you're in South Africa, the Department of Higher Education and Training has a list of accredited journals, which you can download from the website. So that is one way that you can check that it's a credible journal. Another thing that you can do is just, if it's from, I want to please Shruti ask me back to give another session moaning about the publishing industry. But so I've got a lot of problems with that. But if you know that it comes from one of those big publishers, an Emerald, Taylor Francis, I can't think of the other names right now, those journals are fine. But just, I think one of our skills as academics, probably actually one of the things that we're best at, and a skill which is most relevant at this time, is that we can be discerning about knowledge, right? We can be critical, and it's actually our job to do that because we've got these high levels of education, because we spend time reading, because we are researching. We know how to tell if a source is credible or not. And that's part of your job when you're writing as well. And just the last thing that I thought I would share with you is this idea of ignoring counter-arguments when you're using sources. So I just think that this is really a nice thing to do. Often I find when people are drawing on information, they will say, okay, I'm going to just use an example. Higher education in Australia is an important contributor to national growth. Nudelman explains that because of higher education, people get better jobs, which means that they are able to contribute to the coffers. In addition, Singh highlights that higher education leads to better civic knowledge, and this is good for society. A final point by Smith is that something else, thus it's clear that higher education is good for Australia. So people often use sources like that, and it's totally fine. It just can get a little bit boring, and you want to mix it up to keep your reader interested and engaged. So I think that quite a nice thing to do is to look at using literature to bounce off. I think that it's kind of high level, but I think it's quite cool. So for example, we could say Offrey, didn't put a date there, sorry. Offrey explains that something, something, something. This is supported by this point by Levine. However, an alternate perspective is provided by Sabanda, who argues that this could prove to be correct if, while these two perspectives differ, they do highlight something which supports the argument. So can you see I'm doing quite a clever rhetoric little dance here? I'm drawing on literature, but I am using it to argue against and to bounce off against, which just, it's a little bit different, right? And adds a little bit of variation. And remember, right at the beginning, I said that even though academic writing is very much sort of underpinned by sort of the rules, or rules not the right word, the conventions of the genre and the very set conventions, it doesn't need to be boring. And I think little rhetoric strategies like the one that I've shared with you here could be an interesting way of just bringing some variation in when you're working with literature. Okay, let us move on to look at my point number 4, to something I feel very passionately about, which are paragraphs. I believe that a good paragraph is like a building block of a really good piece of writing. So let me show you, I went looking for some examples of writing. And I think I looked particularly in kind of the medical field, because I knew that's generally your field. So these were 2 pages taken out of somebody's thesis. And sorry, I will say I know that they're different. So you can have a journal article, you can have a thesis, you can have a report. Those are different genres. And I know the conventions might be different. So I'm kind of trying to talk generally here. But so can you see how long these paragraphs are? I mean, this one, coping with a stressful situation, begins with fight and flight. Okay, the sentences aren't too long, but oh my God, by the time I get to the end of the paragraph over there, I'm going to have absolutely forgotten what happened at the beginning of the paragraph over there. You've lost me, right? Because it's just too long. There's too much information coming at me. Also, if I just look at a page like this, if you look at it, do you think to yourself, can't wait to read this right now? I would imagine that you don't, because it just looks like a dense sort of wall of text. And again, that is not the feeling that you want your reader to be feeling. You want them to look at your writing and go, ooh, not look at your writing and go like, ugh. Okay. And then you can see how a very long paragraph can be off-putting. Then let's have a look at something like this, which is this is a different discipline. But you can see what this writer has done is they've got, okay, here's a paragraph with a couple of sentences. There's one sentence. There's one sentence. Here's 2 sentences. There's one sentence. Here's a paragraph. Now, what we're seeing over here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I'm looking at the 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs in the middle, or sentences in the middle. The problem with this is I don't know, because they're not put in, like, organized into paragraphs, I don't know what point relates to what. So does this sentence, the 2 main components of the environment, does that actually relate to the point made in the paragraph below? Or is it actually related to the point underneath? Okay. In viscoelastic materials such as asphalt, temperature variations directly impact the stresses and strains. Okay, what does that relate to? What is that? If we're building academic arguments in the writing, what is this one actually? Is it linked to that point? Is it linked to that point? The writers made it really hard for me to make that meaning, because they haven't put it in kind of a nicely structured paragraph for me. A paragraph indicates to me as a reader that there is going to be one main idea discussed here. So when I jump into reading that paragraph, I can think, okay, cool, I know what I'm doing here. And if it's got a nice opening sentence, I'm like, okay, cool, I know what this paragraph is about. And if it's got those transition words, they're also really making it easy for me to understand how the different bits and pieces they're sharing are related to each other and that main statement at the beginning. But if it's something like this, I'm having to go, okay, that point relates to that point. What is this related to? They're making me do all that hard work. And you know what? I'm tired. It is actually the night here in Sydney, and it has been a long day. But not just now, in general, in life, I'm exhausted. There's a lot going on. I don't want to do that hard work. So you can do your reader a huge favor by using just really nicely structured paragraphs. I often get asked, what is the ideal length for a paragraph? I can't give you a rule. I don't know the perfect number of sentences. But I think the things to go with is that you need to have a nice, clear opening sentence with a statement of what will be discussed. Ideally, that sentence as well is a clear articulation of your argument, not a quote from someone else's words, because we want to hear you guiding us through the text, right? So we want to hear that from you. And then enough sentences underneath it to support that point you made at the top. That might mean you've got 6 sentences, 7 sentences, 5 sentences, something like that. It all depends on the point that you're making. But I think the question to ask when you're not when you're writing for the first time, just get the words on the page. But I think the question to ask when you go back and edit is like, am I using paragraphs in order to really help my readers' understanding? And hopefully here you can see why that's such an important thing to do. So I was listening to a podcast the other day, and unfortunately, a lot of my conversations to students, clients, and friends begins with, I was listening to a podcast. And I also know there's nothing more boring in the world than people telling you about the podcast they're listening to. It's like the worst. But I heard this and I thought, wow, I really wanted to share this with you. So it was, they were talking about simple communication and how valuable it is as a strategy. And the guy was talking about the guy who was being interviewed, who's a lecturer, I think, at Harvard Business School, was saying, he was telling a story about this woman, Annie Critcher, who is a scientist. And she had gone on a talk show or maybe a press release or something. They said to her, what is your research about? And she had said, we're bringing the same processes that power the sun to the earth. Sorry, let me start again. We're bringing the same processes that power the sun to the earth to harness the energy in a controlled setting. It's important because it's the holy grail of the clean energy future. I mean, like, how clear and understandable is that? And then he said, is that it? Like, and then he was speaking to her and he said, is that what you would have said if you were talking to fellow scientists? And she said, no, I would have said we were able to achieve ignition, a rapid increase in temperatures associated with alpha particle and self-heating by increasing the... Okay, you can see the second one, she's throwing in all the jargon there. She's assuming a certain level of understanding from her audience. And that would be totally appropriate for the audience that she's writing this to. Whereas knowing that her audience weren't expert scientists, this first one, she found a way to articulate her writing like really clearly for a sort of average, none of us are average human beings, but a more generalist audience. So I think this is an important one. And I don't know if this point is necessary if you are thinking about journal, your journal articles for journals in your discipline. Probably not. You can assume you know your audience, right? You know what they know, and you can build that in. But as I could, and so that's for that. And maybe if you're doing a conference paper for a very niche conference, perhaps for that, perhaps even your thesis, although it's important to explain your things there, you can assume a certain knowledge and understanding of your reader, of your field. But I think what's important to note is that I think that the genre of academic writing is expanding, right? As academics, we don't just talk to other academics anymore. We might, perhaps you've got a brilliant idea and you need to speak to a funder and explain why your idea is so important. Perhaps you're a teacher and you're teaching these ideas to students. Perhaps you are speaking to a general public audience. Perhaps to a business person, right? Maybe you are talking to other academics. You like my picture of an academic. Maybe you're talking to scientists. Perhaps you are giving a keynote somewhere. Each of these situations, your audience has a different level of knowledge of your topic. And in order to really succeed in your communication activity, whether it's spoken, but I know that's not what we're talking about today, we're talking about writing. You need to know your audience and you need to build that into the way that you share your ideas. And back in Cape Town, I used to teach, I taught many different groups, but one of the groups that I taught were engineers. And I never understood anything that they were talking about. But I always said that was great because their job was to try and make me understand it. And if they could, they were doing really well because I had so little understanding. So I think that's your job today as academics as well, is being able to translate your writing depending on audiences. So I just thought a nice example to show you. I don't know if you know The Conversation. Actually, few people do, and it's a great publication. What they do, and there is a South African one, I don't know elsewhere in Africa, but it's a kind of popular media site that translates, I'm going to use that word, academic articles into understandable text. So I went and I saw this article, TV research shows a good diet can cut infections by nearly 50%. I mean, it's so understandable. I look at that and I totally get it. And so this one on the left is an example of, is where in that article from The Conversation, they wrote up the methodology of the study. So you can see it's really easy to understand. The results said that, the numbers of patients, here's how many they recruited. You can see they used bullet points to break up the ideas, really easily understandable. And so then what I did was I went to the academic paper that this article was based on, and look at that. On the right, here is the method section. So basically, these two things are telling the same thing, but they've changed the way that they tell that for different audiences. And I think that would be an important thing for you and me. My children are being very noisy. Children, shush. I think that please, if you have been in the city, I don't even feel bad about noisy children during webinars anymore because I feel like we've all been there. So I think that this is a very important thing for us as academics to be aware of, and it's a skill that's going to propel us further. Because it's all great and well that we're doing awesome research and that we're having brilliant ideas. But if we can't articulate that to a wider audience, one question is, what are we doing with our lives if we are not using that research for impact? And the second question is a very practical one, is we want to advance, right? We want to advance in our careers. We want to advance in our professional profiles, and being able to share our research with a wider audience is a way to do that. So just things to think about when you're changing your research for different audiences. Think about the content you share. What do you share? What do you leave out? Think about the kind of words that you use. Will it be understandable to your audience? Think about the format or structure that you use. So things like bullet points, that sort of thing's important. Do you throw in some stories there to make it more accessible if it's a more general audience? Are you going to use examples and analogies? What tone do you adopt, and how long do you make the piece of writing? Give me 1 second, please. I'm going to yell at my children. One moment. Okay, some superb parenting there from me. Okay, so that's that. So that's in terms of thinking about the audience. And just the last thing I want to leave you with before we open the floor to questions. I think one of the biggest errors that I see in academic writing, or that I come across, is that people are just not writing. So you know the feeling. You sit down and you think about your project, and you think about your project, and you think about the project, and the words just do not come. This is universal. I'm a writing coach, and I've been working on a project, and until very recently, I could not get one word down. It was just impossible. I swear to you, it was so hard. And then I had one awesome day, and I just whacked it. But until that day, it was such a struggle. And if you're anything like me, this feeling of knowing you need to be writing but not writing, it like really wears one down. You feel like, can I even do this? Am I good enough to do this? My colleagues publishing papers like every 2 months. What are they doing? I'm not good enough. It's just there's a lot of the feels around that. And it all comes from this idea of not being able to write. So I thought I'd just share some strategies with you that I use when I get stuck. The first is to create an outline for myself with the headings and the subheadings that will likely go into the piece of writing, and then to work with that. So, if I'm writing a journal article, I will go to the journal, my target journal. I'll look at the structure of their articles. I'll pull out those headings. I'll organize it on a page. And that gives me a sense, at least I'm not starting with a blank page. And then if I'm feeling super honest, I'll even think to myself, okay, literature review. What are the headings I'm going to have in this literature review to organize my literature? Look, it's going to change, and that's fine. But my goal here is just to get some words on the page, just like unlock that being stuck. And working with an outline can be a way to do it. I don't know if you know Pomodoros. It's like my secret weapon. In my PhD, I was so well trained using Pomodoros that I could only think in 25-minute bursts. But Pomodoros is a sort of global writing strategy. You time yourself, you write for 25 minutes, and then you take a break for 5 minutes. Then you write for 25 minutes, then you take a break. And you'll see online there's lots of Pomodoro timers. You can download an app. I have. But what's really nice about Pomodoros is if I'm having those days that I just can't write, I think to myself, I'm just going to do one Pomodoro. I'm just going to do 25 minutes. Because literally I can do anything for 25 minutes. It's unthreatening. But often just that experience of saying, I'm just going to do one, again, just gets me writing. And then sometimes I actually enjoy it and I carry on. So you might want to Google that and see if it works for you. Walking. Brilliant. Get up off your desk. Go for a walk. Get the energy flowing. Get out of your headspace. I find I often solve problems in my head while I'm walking. I'm not really even thinking about it. There's something about the movement. That change makes a difference. You might be one of these people. I'm not like this, but I've worked with people who are great at talking their ideas and struggle to write them. So here's a great hack. Just record yourself talking, have it transcribed, and there's software for it, and then go in and work with that. The brilliant thing is that you're not starting from a blank page, right? You'll have something there. It'll be messy, it'll be anecdotal, but it's something, and then you can build on that as well. Google Docs can record you talking and transcribe it as you're talking. And then there's a program, Otter AI. I'll type it in the chat, which can transcribe notes for you, audio files, and is free if they're just small amounts. That might be a strategy that works for you. Okay, ChatGPT. We're going to go there. I'm using ChatGPT as a generic word for all kinds of generative AI. I know there's Bard, there's Coolbot, there are many more. I think the knee-jerk reaction to generative AI is don't do it, it's bad. We all know the problems with it. I'm sure you do. We know that ChatGPT stopped learning in 2021, I think, so it's not up to date. We know that sometimes it gives funny answers. We know that AI has bias issues. It cannot replace our things that we're good at, which is lucky, right? We're kind of future-proof because we as academics, we're good at being critical. We are good at assessing things. We are skilled at creating arguments. It can't do that, but it can do a lot, right? So if you're feeling absolutely stuck, perhaps ask a tiny question. Go into ChatGPT if you haven't. Ask it like, what are the main points in higher education in Australia? And it'll spit out 5 points, and then at least I've got something to jump off on. I'm not copying it, heaven forbid, that's an academic integrity issue. But I'm just using it to help me just break that initial stuckness. Again, I'm just about words on the page. I can build on something, but it's got to exist already. Nothing worse than a just empty page with a cursor. And it just looks at you. If the cursor looks at you, look at the cursor. It's like a deep, deep meditative relationship between you and the cursor. So you might, if you're truly stuck, go and just have a look and see what it gives you and use that as a launching space. Of course, don't ever type in your article topic, get the article, it will write the article for you, submit it. Don't do that because the writing will be bland and boring. It will likely be wrong and huge issues around academic integrity. But I want to share one thing and then I'm really almost finished. I heard it read, someone wrote, use ChatGPT as if it's your research assistant. And for that, it's really fantastic. If I've got a little question, I will just ask it, and then I'll use that, incorporate that into what I'm working on. And then I want to end where I started. Everyone's first draft sucks. It's meant to. So if you're feeling like your writing is sucking now, you are totally doing the right thing because you have writing. You can go back, you can work on it, you can craft it. We all go through this process. When I worked at the writing center, the students who spoke to me could not believe that I used to consult with many of those students, of the professors as well, who came for help. So we are all struggling. It is not just you. I promise, I swear to you. And I say that to you not to make you think, wow, this is so hard, but just to make you think, I'm not alone. They could do it. I will eventually be able to do it. And I want to just end off by saying that when it is working, I don't know if you've been there, but have you got into the zone? I had it the other day with this project I was struggling to start. I got into the zone, like things started working, sentences started appearing, ideas were leading to more ideas. We were doing a beautiful phrase that I heard. I was writing myself into revelation. As I was having ideas, more ideas were coming. And that was such a beautiful experience. So that is what you have to look forward to. If it's hard, you are not alone, my friend. We have all been there. But hopefully these 5 common errors and how to fix them today, hopefully some of those ideas you could relate to your own work and that you could use going forward to help improve your writing. I was in a meeting today and one of the people in the meeting introduced herself and said, I'm whoever, and something interesting about me is I have the fastest growing YouTube channel in academia or something. And I said, hi, I'm Gabby, and something interesting about me is that I have the smallest growing YouTube channel in academia. So this is just a little plug to say, if you found this helpful and you would be interested in more information, head over to my YouTube channel. It's teeny tiny, but I have a lot of videos talking about this kind of stuff, and maybe they're short, really accessible, and you might just find an answer to something that you're grappling with over there. So that might be something that you want to head over to. But that brings me to the end of my input, and I've gone on a little longer than I wanted to, but we have a couple of minutes to take some questions. So I'm going to hand over to you now. I'm sure, should they write the questions down or can they talk? How will it work?